Behind the Pod.
Hey, this is Brandon, and this is episode 6 of Behind the Pod. In this episode, I'll be digging into Be Free, Be Forgiven by Sarah Dismore. And in this episode, Sarah talks about her journey as a rebellious young adult who got an abortion and her pathway to forgiveness of God and her own self-forgiveness. And I have to admit that when I first listened to Sarah's audio track, I was in tears. And I know this is a difficult episode for her, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to honor her in how I produced this episode. The episode begins with Sarah giving some background on her relationship with her parents, and what you hear during the story is a very simple, very clean drum, as you can hear in the background. There are a couple of sounds that are introduced during the story when Sarah discusses the conflict between her and her dad. And in Sarah's recollection, her dad's tone and posture was condemning and accusatory, and I wanted a drum track that sounded a bit more chaotic and out of sorts to convey this tension. But more importantly, there's a sound that was introduced in Sarah's last episode that represented the groanings and cry of the Holy Spirit. I wanted to carry that sound motif into this episode as well. So what you hear during this first conflict is a more intense drum and a vocal that again represents the cry of the Holy Spirit during the conflict. This cry of the Spirit will be with Sarah throughout this episode, and you can hear the first conflict and the sound introduced right here. Sarah goes on to detail the background story, and then she gets to this point where she talks about a time when she fell hard. She goes on to talk about getting pregnant her senior year of high school and then her decision to have an abortion. And during this account, there are several things going on sonically. There's the chaotic, intense drum that comes back and is joined again by the cry of the Spirit. But there are also two other sounds that are introduced, and I'm a sucker for old school rap. I grew up listening to hip hop and had almost every cassette tape of every rap artist that came out in the 80s. In fact, I have an old school rap playlist on Spotify that I curated, and I listen to it all the time. All that to say, I've been waiting for the perfect time to use a beatbox track. And I didn't think it would happen in this episode, but I needed something that sounded real and raw. I needed something that sounded organic. And the beatbox track was perfect here because neither artificial sounds nor instrumentation could fully capture this raw humanity. And to me, the beatboxing sounds like real life. There's also another sound underlying the chaotic drums and the Holy Spirit vocal. It's an ominous sounding guitar track that captures the fear and shame that Sarah says that she experienced. And you can hear those two sounds here. And here they are together. When we reach the point in which Sarah says that she had an abortion, the two sounds that are left are the ominous guitar and the cry of the Spirit. And this is the place where Sarah's fear and shame are laid bare, but the place where the Spirit is with her and has not abandoned her. You can hear that here. In the aftermath of the abortion, there's this line of absolute vulnerability in which Sarah says, "I was the shell of the person that God intended me to be." And this line of realness and rawness is again conveyed with the humanity of the beatbox. When it kicks back in, we hear Sarah talk about her ball and chain and how she needed forgiveness, how she needed hope. And it's in this place where we hear the longing cry of a female voice. So amidst the chaos and in her humanity, she cries out until we just hear her cry. And you can hear that right here.
I was the shell of the person that God intended me to be. There wasn't a day that I didn't think about it. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't beg for God's forgiveness. I desperately needed forgiveness, healing, some sort of hope. through another series of life changes, I found myself going to church for the first time in well over a decade, trying to get right with God somehow. And one Sunday morning, along with the slides that play before church starts,
You can hear everything else drop out except the longing female voice that accompanies Sarah right here.
There was a slide that hit me like a wrecking ball. It was for a post-abortion recovery group that was starting up soon. I think I literally stopped breathing and my heart stopped working because I could not believe there was a church that had that sort of support group, let alone that they would think that there was possibly anyone in the pews who that slide could be relevant to. And it was relevant to me.
This is where the trajectory of the episode changes. The female cry that you can hear in the background turns into a hopeful female vocal. It's also the beginning point of Sarah moving from guilt and shame and despair into a place of forgiveness and hope and healing. You can also hear the hope conveyed by the piano track coming up.
I set out on a 12-week intense journey of healing with that support group. I was doing the work, facing my past. I was trying so hard to heal the deep wound of my abortion and find forgiveness and peace. But my biggest hang-up was the forgiveness thing. And I remember with one class just saying, okay, I get it. God can forgive me. He already has. And yeah, Jesus and the cross and everything. But why don't I feel forgiven? And even if I never feel it, there is no way I can ever forgive myself for the things I've done. So this going to hell feeling is always here with me. I can't let it go. I want to feel forgiven, but I just don't. So when will I ever feel forgiven? I can't help but cry as I even say that now because it was such an emotional thing then and it still brings me to tears. And one of the leaders of the group, she gave me this serious dose of tough love, and she said, "What do you want God to do to make you feel it? Seriously, you are refusing."
The end of the episode is not the typical end on a positive note deal. Sarah comes back with the tension that may still exist in truly forgiving oneself and living in the forgiveness of Christ, and this is conveyed by bringing all of the sounds together at the end. You can hear the chaotic drum, the humanity of the beatbox, the cry of the spirit, the hopeful song of the female voice, and the hope conveyed by the piano. The final line of truth that Sarah drops is the truth of Christ when she says, "Forgiveness is free. Forgiveness is for everyone. Jesus' power to forgive is His and His alone. Stop dragging around your own ball and chain. Be free, be forgiven. It's that simple." It's during this line that everything drops out except the hopeful song of the female voice with the cry of the spirit.
Of course, I had to learn all of this the hard way. I took one long, winding, messed up road to get to a place where I actually could believe all of that. And I still struggle with that feeling of forgiveness from time to time. And I have to remind myself that God's grace is big enough and never ending. I have to remind myself that what Jesus did on the cross was enough. Life is hard, but the forgiveness thing, it doesn't have to be.
Here's where everything else drops out, and you're just left with the hopeful female voice and the cry of the spirit.
Forgiveness is free. Forgiveness is for everyone. Jesus' power to forgive is His and His alone. Stop dragging around your own ball and chain. Be free. Be forgiven. It's that simple.
And that's it for this episode of Behind the Pod. If you like what you're hearing, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate you. We appreciate you listening, your support, your encouragement. Until next time.